Curious about using Python with Power BI? Stick around. Okay, so if you used Python before and you've used Power BI before, you may or may not have realized that you can actually use Python to some degree with Power BI. So this is just to try and show you what the situation is, what's good, what's not so good, and really where you can use Python with Power BI in your day-to-day. So first of all, Power BI uses a local Python installation to run scripts. So what that means is you need to run Python on your desktop, where your Power BI desktop is running, and it will all run using that Python installation. So already you're probably realizing that this is tied somewhat to Power BI desktop. It's not necessarily 100% the case, but we'll find out a little bit more. So Python can be used with Power BI in two ways. So you can import data via Power Query, and this uses a fairly well-known Python library called Pandas, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. But also you can create visuals with Python as well, and that uses Pandas and Matplotlib, which is a popular plotting library for Python. So in terms of importing data into Power BI, Python queries can do anything that Python can do, but Power BI will only recognize Pandas data frames that are in memory at the end of the script. So we'll take a little bit of a look at this, but essentially Python and Power BI have sort of signed a contract, if you like, to say, okay, we're only going to allow certain types of data to be imported into Power BI through Python scripts. It needs to conform to a Pandas data frame. And there are some conventions in terms of the scripts that you write in order to say, at the end of the script, whatever Pandas data frames are in memory, they will be available to Power BI in terms of your import. So you can actually also use Python scripts as Power Query steps. So you can add steps to your import and add additional Python scripts. So Python queries typically refreshed on a Power BI desktop, right, which will actually rerun the local script. So when we're thinking about automated imports, automated refreshes that you may be able to do from, say, OneDrive, Excel, CSV files, all that kind of stuff, not quite as simple as that. So make no mistake, if you're planning to do stuff with Python, then it first starts on your desktop. And if you particularly want to automate it, you can refresh automatically via the Power BI service, but you need to use a data gateway, which will also rerun that local script. So you may put that on a server, or you may leave that on your development machine, but that's when you start to have to think, okay, is this really how I want to use Power BI and have this, say, in a production environment sort of setting? So if this is all stuff that you're doing for your personal use, or essentially something in your day-to-day that you're just trying to get done, all great. But if you're trying to automate, I guess, a robust production solution, may want to think a little bit harder as to whether or not this is the right thing for you. So let's just take a little bit of a look at a sample Python script. So this is actually just from one of the Power BI pages from Microsoft, just one of the help pages. And all this is actually doing, so it imports Pandas at the top there, and it creates a data frame, df, and it just creates it with some static data. So it creates several columns here, fname, so first name, age, weight, gender, state, children, and pets, right? And so there's essentially arrays that we're adding there. So this is static data. And at the end of that, we're just printing the data frame. You don't need to do that. Essentially, that df variable is actually available at the end of this script. So the script will run with the following Python installation, right? So I've set that in Power BI. So C Python 3.10, right? So that's my local Python environment. if you're familiar with Python and want to use a specific virtual environment that may have other libraries and other things installed, pip installed, etc., you can set the Python location, essentially the Python installation, to that environment. So that's all entirely possible. Again, what you've got to think is, do you want to add that complexity to a tool on your desktop, right? This becomes a bit of a brittle solution if you want to actually automate this for other people to use as well. So it's just more setup steps, more things that you need to document, etc. But you can change all of this within the options and settings. Again, you can do this via a data gateway if you need to as well. So this is then what that looks like when you actually import into Power BI. So we have a thing called DF. So whatever the data frame name is, you can obviously rename this as well in your query. But essentially, there we go. There's the data as it currently stands. And we'll take a little bit of a look at an example in a sec. So moving on to visuals. So Python visuals use matplotlib, which again is a very popular Python library to create plots. But it's a little bit more limited. So this hasn't really changed over time. So the data is limited to 150,000 rows or 250 megabytes. So sometimes, you may be dealing with a huge amount of data in Power BI. There will be some limitations here in terms of what you can actually visualize using Python. So also the display will be capped at 72 dpi. So it's not going to be the highest resolution, highest fidelity, if you like, in terms of clarity and making, a nice huge visual, but it'll be visible. The calculations also time out at 5 minutes, right? So if you're crunching through a lot of data, these are all things to bear in mind, right? This is not something that you will want to use as a scalable solution. In my personal opinion, I think this is great for some prototyping. If you've got some existing Python code, great to get it integrated with Power BI. But think again if you're planning to use this as your go-to solution to use Python in Power BI. And the visual isn't interactive as well. So contrary to all the other visuals that you'll be used to in Power BI, where you can click and filter and do all sorts of cool stuff, these visuals are essentially static, right? So they're just an image. And they are, although, updated when you change filters. But again, what that will do is rerun a script to actually redraw that visual. So also something that in newer versions you may need to do. So when you open a report that has a Python or probably an R visual that's using scripts, you will need to physically enable that via a button as well. So it's disabled by default. And so we'll see some of these visuals in a sec. So this is actually the script behind a simple visual, right? And so it's, again, importing matplotlib. And it takes the pandas data frame up the top here, again, with all of our different columns. And it drops duplicates. And then it's just plotting a bar chart and then shows that. And it looks pretty much like this. So very simple chart. Looks all fine, but again, is it as nice as the sort of charts that you can get in Power BI by default? So here we have a very simple report, right? I've just got a filter here on age, so 18 to 80, and what this is actually filtering on is the age that is there in DF over here. And so what you'll see, if we just take a look at the data here, you'll find that looks pretty much, DF, that looks pretty much like the data that we imported before. And so if I just go and edit the query, just to show you, I'll probably need to drag this over because I've got multiple screens. Over we go. Okay. So we have this data here. And if we look at the source for this Python script, as we saw before, and then it navigates, and there we have our data. So nice and simple there. And so we have our data, and what you'll see here is that we actually have two of these visuals. So this is a standard visual, and this is a Python visual. So if we just click on that, now you see your Python script editor that looks as we saw before. It's actually rendering that same data, but just via matplotlib. So if we just click out of that, and let's just change this filter here. So let's just say we're now going to filter from, say, I don't know, 34. So you can see a little bit of a lag there, right? So essentially, what was happening behind the scenes is that we were filtering that data, and obviously it immediately showed on our standard Power BI visual here. But behind the scenes, this was running the Python script to actually do the same thing and update the data set that was actually then behind the matplotlib visual. So again, let's just make that again, right? So here you can see, and that's obviously set it back to the default, and so that was actually a little bit quicker. So as you can see, this is fairly, it's fairly functional, but as you can see, you can't do anything apart from click on that. But now, if I were to actually do stuff here, right? I can get little pop-ups, I can get my tooltips, I can do drill throughs, all that kind of good stuff that you can do in Power BI. But essentially with Python here, you'll come up short on all of those aspects. But for prototyping, for taking something that's existing that you have in Python, go for your life, Just one more thing I wanted to just quickly show. So I've got another data set here, another table. And if I edit this query, this is just really showing where you add steps. So essentially here what I had was a source that was really just a table. So I was just creating a table on the fly here, just adding some data. And so all we have is a name and score. All I wanted to show here that where you can actually add a Python script as a separate piece. So as you'll see here, we have this Python script, and what's this actually doing? It's doing something very simple. So we're importing pandas, we're importing another library called UUID, and all I'm actually doing is adding a GUID, essentially, as an additional field. So an additional field called ID, I'm actually just getting essentially a random GUID, and I'm adding that on the end. And then we're expanding that data, and essentially then what we have is this ID, and at the end, that's essentially the data that we're looking at. And if I just close this, and we just take a look at that table, results, you can see there, right? So we've added that UUID, and that is actually added in via Python. So you don't necessarily need to use it to grab your data. You can actually use it for data manipulation, right? So you could, do some other stuff with pandas there. You could actually slice and dice the data. But again, what I tend to find is, once you have all of your transformations and everything there within Power BI itself or in Power Query, they're probably more convenient in most cases than what you would actually use in Python. Certainly for the majority of cases. Obviously, there are going to be some more interesting, esoteric sort of use cases where you can do some really cool stuff with Python. Absolutely, go for it. And that's probably a better use case, I would say, than the visuals. But hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of what you can do with Python, where you might want to use it and where, you may want to limit your usage as well. But hopefully that's helpful. Catch you next time.